Please make sure to mute your microphone and turn off camera. Make sure to send all your questions to everybody in the chat. And the presentation is being recorded and will be posted on our website in about 2 weeks from now. We'll also be sending out a survey after this, and it'd be really helpful if you could get some feedback, or if you could provide some feedback so we can know what we did well and what we can work on. So let's get started. With me I've got Andy, Antoine, Jonathan, and Heidi, who will all be assisting during this webinar as well as during the Q&A at the end. We'll have about a half-hour Q&A session where we can answer questions and go over questions that were submitted previous to this webinar. So here's our agenda. Applying for non-retail licenses, the Alcohol, Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau, also known as the TTB. Non-retail licenses, we're going to be focusing specifically on production licenses and what those licenses can do. We'll also mention production contracts, certificate of label approvals, also known as COLAs, agents licenses, and then, like I mentioned, we'll have a Q&A session at the end where we can answer some of your questions. Please feel free to send questions in throughout the presentation, and we'll also have a brief pause at the end of the presentation where you can continue submitting those questions. So first we're going to touch on applying for non-retail licenses. The application for non-retail licenses should be submitted no sooner than 60 to 90 days before the anticipated opening date, or the application will be administratively withdrawn, and you'll be encouraged to apply closer to your opening date. If you apply 120 days before your opening, we will more than likely administratively close your application and you'll need to reapply. Conversely, if you apply 30 days before your opening date, we may not be able to license you in time in order for you to begin operations. We also no longer accept non-retail applications if the applicant has not been federally approved by the Alcohol, Tobacco and Tax Trade Bureau, again also known as the TTB. And we typically process applications in 60 days or less. A lot of that depends on how quickly we can receive documents from the applicants and how many clarifications are needed on those documents. So your first step is to secure a location where you can produce and store your product. You should contact your local city or county to meet zoning regulations. The local authority will also be notified of your application and have the right to object to the application or the individuals if you have not met all of the requirements. They have 20 days to respond to the notification. They can request an extension in regards to that notification. Also, additionally, touching on this, garages and sheds are common and typically accessible space. However, direct access to the residences must be completely closed off. If there's a door to the living residence, you'll be expected to wall it up. You should also check with your local authorities prior to pursuing a liquor license. They might have other requirements in regards to that space. So the initial interview. Once the application is received by us, the WSLCB, you'll be contacted to do a short telephone interview to verify the information on the application. After that interview, a document request is going to be emailed to you with all the information that's needed, and you'll be given 2 weeks to return those documents to your investigator. We may also require a physical posting notice be posted outside your location. The interviews last typically 15 to 20 minutes, sometimes longer depending on the information being requested, if there's further clarification, or if you have a lot of questions for the investigator. Who again will be working with you throughout the licensing process to answer questions, to help clarify the purpose of documents, and really just define what we need and what we're looking for. We also encourage licensees to review the request for documents carefully and use it as a checklist. You can mark on it, you can do whatever you need to do. We just recommend people read it very carefully because it can have a lot of the information that you're looking for. So completing the process. Once all of the required information is received, your application will be forwarded for supervisor review. If a conditional approval is recommended, the terms might include but are not limited to contacting an enforcement officer for a briefing and a final inspection. Again, when you send your documents to the investigator, they're reviewed in date order received. So it's really important that you send those to your investigator as soon as possible. They'll will contact you either by phone or email with any clarifications or if there are additional documents needed. If there are missing items or items that are filled out incompletely, you'll be given another 2 weeks to provide those documents back to us. Again, those documents are also received in date order received, reviewed in date order received, so we encourage applicants to respond with them as soon as possible. So the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau, again known as the TTB, they're responsible for enforcing the laws regulating alcohol, production, importation, and wholesale businesses, tobacco manufacturing and importing businesses, and alcohol labeling and advertising. Before a non-retail license can be issued for alcohol production, applicants must first be approved federally. So you should be able to provide that federal approval either immediately prior to or after the phone interview with your investigator. The most recent processing times for the TTB were about 60 days for wineries and breweries and 70 days for distilleries. Now again, that's on average, and their licensing process is a lot more in-depth than ours, so it can take a lot longer than that. It can take shorter than that as well. And times can fluctuate, so we encourage people to apply with the TTB as soon as they're able to. So the required TTB permits. These are the federal permits we expect to see if you're trying to be licensed as a producer. For wineries, wine producer and blender basic permit. For breweries, there's a brewer's notice. And distilleries and rectifiers, there's distilled spirits plant, distiller, and rectified basic permit. And again, please be sure to mute your phone upon entry. That way we don't have any issues with sound. Sometimes we see licensees pursuing a production license and they have a different type of federal permit. For instance, if you're licensed federally as a wholesaler, we cannot approve you as a producer. And you would need to either remedy that with the TTB or pursue a different license based on what you want to do. Here's some of the TTB contact information, and again, this will be posted on our website in about 2 weeks from now, but take some time and copy that through. Again, that approval will need to be in hand before you start the process with us. Otherwise, the application will be administratively withdrawn. We typically recommend if you have any questions, go straight to the TTB. Because they know their process a lot more in-depth than we do. We can answer some general questions, but again, just go straight to the source. It's probably your best bet. So business licensing services. Once you have a location and you have your approved federal permit in hand, you'll need to complete a business license application and the Liquor Control Board addendum for non-retail and interstate common carrier licenses form. Both of those can be accessed at Business Licensing Services, Department of Revenue. Be sure to follow their directions when applying online or by mail, and we recommend to applicants to include as much information as possible when they're filling out that application, because a lot of that information comes to us, and it can make it a lot simpler and faster for us to process that application. Missing information can slow down the processing time for your investigator and require a lot more clarification. So non-retail producer licenses. In-state, there's wine producers, beer producers, and spirits producers. Wine is domestic winery, also wine grower is an uncommon but sometimes applicable license type. Beer producers, microbreweries and domestic breweries. And spirits producers include craft distillery, distiller rectifier, and fruit and or wine distillers. Those are our main production license types. We have about 953 wineries and 11 wine growers licensed in Washington State. We have about 418 breweries, 35 distilleries, 9 fruit and wine distilleries, and 92 craft distilleries. Again, if you are sending questions in, make sure to send them to everybody so that we can get them answered in a timely manner. So what can a domestic winery do? It allows you to manufacture wine in Washington State. It allows you to sell wine of your own production at retail for on- or off-premise consumption. It allows you to act as a distributor for wine of your own production. And each production facility can have up to 4 approved off-site tasting rooms. At each of those locations, you can add a beer wine restaurant privilege, but if you do, you'll need to be operating as a bona fide restaurant and meet the requirements of that restaurant privilege. Again, you can have up to 4 off-site tasting rooms. You can add to the production facility any retail privilege listed in RCW 6624. You're also allowed sales and sampling at farmers markets, and warehousing at an off-site location. You're allowed 1 per production facility. You're also allowed growler sales for wine of your own production. Just to touch on warehousing a little bit, at the off-site location is for product of your own production. You can't sample to customers or sell at retail from this location. You also cannot share that warehouse with other licensees. It's purely for your own product, just for the storage of wine. So, microbreweries and breweries allows you to do similar things, but with beer. Allows you to manufacture beer in Washington State. Allows you to sell beer of your own production at retail for on- and off-premise consumption. It allows you to act as a distributor for beer of your own production and sell other breweries' brands on tap as long as it does not exceed 25% of your own on-tap offerings. Meaning if you have 4 taps, 3 of them are yours, you can have 1 guest tap. You can also hold up to 2 retail liquor licenses to operate either a spirits beer wine restaurant, or tavern. You can have 1 of those be on-site on your production facility location and 1 off, or you can have 2 off, and again, this is under the same entity. You may contract produce for another microbrewery or domestic brewery, and warehousing at an off-site location is another thing that you can do, 1 per production facility. You also allow sales and sampling at farmers markets, and you can sell growlers of cider. Growlers of cider must be Washington-produced wine only. There's a RCW 6604010. Again, that information will be posted on our website after the fact. If you want to sell cider from another state, you have to add a retail privilege to your microbrewery license to do so. So let's move on to distiller, rectifier, and craft distillers. Allows you to distill, blend, rectify, and bottle spirituous liquor. It allows you to sell spirits of your own production directly to a consumer for off-premise consumption and act as a distributor for spirits of your own production. You can have samples on site of 0.5 ounces or less, provided free or for a charge, to a maximum of 2 ounces per person per day. Those samples can be altered with water, ice, alcoholic or non-alcoholic mixtures. If they're alcoholic mixtures, it has to be of your own production. You can also add a spirits beer wine restaurant privilege to that location. Again, if you add that restaurant privilege, you have to meet all the requirements of the restaurant privilege, and including acting as a bona fide restaurant. You can also attend farmers market sales, certified farmers markets, for sales of your own product, and you can have an approved off-site warehouse for distribution of spirits of your own production. All licenses require that you have a functional still on premise. And so the differences between craft and distillery licenses are production amounts. Craft distilleries can only produce 150,000 gallons or less of spirits per calendar, and half of the raw materials used in the production must be grown in Washington State. So a fruit and or wine distiller allows you to distill fruit and or wine to produce fruit brandy or other wine spirits. It allows you to sell spirits of your own production directly to a consumer for off-premise consumption, provided that the sale occurs when the customer is physically present on the licensed premise. It allows you to act as a distributor for spirits of your own production, and again, you can provide samples of 0.5 ounces or less, free or for a charge, to a maximum of 2 ounces per person per day. You can also add a spirits beer wine restaurant privilege. Again, you have to meet all the requirements of that, and you're allowed sales at approved certified farmers markets. A warehouse is allowed to be maintained, approved warehouse can be maintained off the premise for distribution of your product. And some things to keep notes of, all producers are allowed, well actually let's move on to the next slide. Internet sales, there we go. All producers are allowed internet sales and delivery. If you're using a contractor for facilitating the payment or delivery, you must submit a copy of the contract for pre-approval and compliance with the regulations. For resale, liquor is not for resale. Liquor must come directly from the licensed location. Liquor can be ordered in person at licensed location by mail, telephone, or internet, or by other similar methods, And again, this goes into approved facilitating the payment or delivery. Only a licensee or a licensee's direct employees may accept and process orders and payments. A contractor may not do so on behalf of a licensee except for transmittal of payment through a third-party service, and the use of these internet or mobile applications for retail customers to purchase alcohol in Washington State are allowed under the following conditions. The sale must be made by the licensee. The licensee processes payment for the sale. The liquor licensee pays the owner of the mobile application a service fee, and all orders and payments must be fully processed before the liquor transfers ownership, or in the case of delivery, leaves a licensed premise. So this is a popular subject, production contracts. Contract production is an existing manufacturer contracts with another manufacturer to produce and package alcohol on their behalf, or vice versa. A product contract is only valid if it's between a licensed winery and another winery, brewery and another brewery, or a distillery and another distillery. Wineries, brewers, and distillers cannot contract produce for distributors. Very important to keep note of. There's a couple reasons this is typically done for, such as small businesses being able to get their foot in the door. Some other licensee may have expanded capacity for bottling, or maybe they produce a product that you can't produce or don't produce. Something else to keep note of is an unlicensed entity may not contract produce with a licensed entity, and you must have the appropriate state licenses to have a contract production or production contract in place. Copies of those contracts are submitted to the WSLCB for review. Additionally, if you don't have if you do have a production contract, you're still required to produce yourself. You have to operate the full scope of your license. So if you're operating as a winery, you still need to produce wine. You can't contract out for 100% of your wine production. So COLAs, Certificate of Label Approvals. The TTB implements and enforces a broad range of compliance provisions in regards to alcohol products, labeling, in accordance with federal laws and regulations. All alcohol producers must apply for COLAs and follow the labeling and advertising regulations, which can be found at the TTB website. Labels are required to be submitted prior to sales of alcohol in Washington. Typically, we require a copy of the federal COLA. However, for products that do not qualify for a COLA, we have a form that you can submit for label tracking with the Washington State. You can contact customer service, and they can guide you through where that needs to be sent to. Labels can be denied if they're attractive to children, depict a youth in possession or consumption of alcohol, or if a label is claiming therapeutic effects or enhances health or performance. There's a WAC that references that, 314-52. It outlines Washington advertising rules. So who needs an agent's license? This is something that most licensees will need at some point. Owners and direct employees of domestic wineries are exempt from this requirement unless they are hiring a third-party company to solicit sales on their behalf. There's the RCW and WAC, and any licensee or employee who calls, visits, takes orders, pours, or emails liquor licensees to solicit sales needs an agent's license. Again, the only person or persons that are exempt from this requirement are domestic wineries and their employees, unless they're using a third party. So, mandatory alcohol server training, MASS program. You won't send this information to your investigator, but we will provide you with a link on how to start that process. These permits are required within 60 days of initial employment. As an employer, you can require it sooner. Failure to have a valid permit and ID could result in a violation for the permit holder and the licensed establishment. And the request of documentation should clarify these are not sent to your investigator. And your investigator, when they send you the request for documents, it should be pretty clear, but you can always request clarification. There are a couple types of permits, a Class 13 and a Class 12. Class 13 are issued to individuals 18 to 20 years of age, and Class 12 permits are issued to individuals 21 years of age or older. Upon approval or request, a valid Class 13 permit can be upgraded to a Class 12 if the permit holder turns 21. And again, you can always contact customer service if you have more questions on this. This is a little bit more of an in-depth subject. you can call them at 360-664-1600. Try not to do it right in the middle of our presentation, but they're very helpful when it comes to these questions. So now we're going to pause it briefly for a question and answer period. We'll give it about 3 to 5 minutes, a break, and then we'll get started. We're also going to, just a reminder, we're going to send out a short survey, so please give us some feedback so we know what we're doing right and what we're not. Samantha, if you can go ahead and pause it, and we'll be back in about 3 to 5 minutes. There's a definition RCW, which is 6604010. Again, that's 6604010. That's an RCW. And it defines wine as any alcoholic beverage not exceeding 24% alcohol by volume, and any wine over 24% alcohol by volume is considered a spirit. We are interested in offering another winery's product out of our tasting room. Is this allowed? Yes, if the tasting room location also has a beer/wine restaurant privilege. Otherwise, wineries can only sell wine of their own production under the requirements. And again, if there's an additional tasting room license at that location, that winery can sell wine of their production.
So I'll take the next couple of questions that I see come up here. This is Heidi. There's a few questions in regards to winery, meaderies and cideries. A couple of questions. How many are there? Since they're qualified as a winery, we have no way of tracking how many cideries are licensed in Washington or however many meaderies there. And there is a question involved here that says, is there a chance that wineries will be able to sample and sell at public events? We'll have to research that. There are some new permits in place that we are not real familiar with. And then, are meaderies allowed to sell at farmers markets? Yes, they are. Anybody who makes cider or mead, since it's qualified as wineries, are allowed to sell at farmers markets with the appropriate endorsements in place added to their winery privileges. And there's another question, is there a grace period for new employees to obtain agent's licenses, as there is with master permits? And no, there's no grace period, because the minute they start trying to solicit sales, they're required to have that agent's license in place.
Another question that we received is regards another mass question. Are microbreweries exempt from mass? And no, they aren't. So anyone who's going to be serving alcohol to customers and patrons does have to get a mass permit.
So do I need a distributor license in addition to the brewery license to distribute? No, self-distribution is built into the manufacturer licenses. All of them allow you to distribute wine, beer, or spirits, depending on which license you have, of your own production.
So another question has come in, if you don't produce wine and then cannot hold a domestic winery license but still hold a TTB basic permit, you are storing wine in bond, can you still be a host to a tenant? That license type for liquor board point of view would be a bonded wine warehouse, and you are not producing at the location, and therefore you cannot alternate the premise or be a host to a tenant. Another question that's come in, if you license your garage for wine or mead production, are you allowed to have private tasting sales, not a tasting room open to the public? If the location is licensed as a winery, you can have a private tasting event if you choose to, invitation only, or invitation only. Are there any exceptions made walling up a door between home and garage to get the garage licensed? There are no exceptions made. If there is access to the living quarters of the home, then that opening needs to be walled up.
As a brewery, are we able to cater at events? If the brewery has an additional retail privilege that allows and that has the catering endorsement, then the brewery, under that privilege, would be allowed to cater events.
So we have a question we're going to need to research. This question is in regards to cash on delivery. So if a winery is doing their own distribution, the question is regards to can they pay on net 30 days. So we'll research that, and that will come out in the questions that we post on the website in about 2 weeks.
May I distribute from a farmer's market? No. Producers may not store wine or beer at a farmer's market beyond the hours that it offers bottled wine or beer for sale. Cannot act as a distributor from the market location. Another question is, does our retail space have to be separate from a production area? Yes, we require that they be delineated. The production area cannot be commingled with the tasting area or the retail space.
Another question has come in, can wine be distributed to the local market through a tasting room? The tasting room is for retail sales only, so no distribution of wine from the tasting room is allowed for at this time.
One of the other questions that we did receive was, can we share warehouses with other producers? And the answer to that is you can share it if they are in their own separate units. Then in that situation, yes, you could share space. You can all be in the same building as producers, but you would all need to be in your own separate units. There would have to be distinction between each individual producer.
So another question's come in, are you saying that Washington considers a permitted and licensed microdistillery that does not sell a product to be an illicit moonshine operation? No, we are not saying that. What the question was originally was, can I produce for personal consumption at home? If you're licensed as a distillery, the intent behind that license is to resell it and not for personal consumption. So if you choose to purchase from the distillery for personal consumption, that's a little different than what the previous question had asked.
One of the questions that we got in chat is if you want to license a location but are not sure what has to be changed to the location to get licensed, is there a way to work with someone to make sure they will meet FED, state, city requirements? So that, I mean, you will be working with your investigator to make sure that your location is going to be compliant, but you would also have to do your own research into the county or the city that you're in to make sure that you're meeting those standards and those codes and those regulations, as well as what the TTB requires for what their standards are for a location. So you would have to do that research on both those ends, and then you would end up at us after that point where we would help you with anything else that we also require.
So another question is, do TTB laws supersede Washington state laws? And the answer is no. We try and work together as closely as possible, but Washington state law dictates what you're able to do in Washington state.
So another question has come in, can a non-liquor retail store get a license to carry and sell a brewery or winery's product? Any entity could be licensed potentially as either a grocery store or a beer wine specialty shop, which would allow for you to sell beer or wine made by a brewery or a winery.
Let's see, we have another question here. As a brewery with a beer, wine, restaurant privilege, can I contract with a food truck or another company to come into my space instead of cooking our own meals? So no, you wouldn't be able to utilize a food truck or any other third-party food source to completely, to utilize them and to serve all your food. You would have to meet the requirements of a bona fide restaurant with us and be able to prepare and serve your own meals to your customers. And then if you are able to meet those standards where you're able to serve your own food, then you could still utilize other food sources like a food truck and things like that, but you would still have to meet our standards of a bona fide restaurant and be able to have a fully functioning kitchen and be able to serve your own meals to your customers.
Another question here is, how long is processing with business licensing services? And so business licensing services is the entity you'll get a hold of to apply initially for your business license and for your liquor license. And it's very quick unless there's a lot of missing information or missing fees, in which it's typically sent to us overnight. It may take a little bit longer with business licensing services if they have clarification.
Another question we have here is there a percentage that I have to do or contract out to still be in compliance? And there's no set amount of production that you need to do or to contract produce, but you must but to qualify as a producer, you do have to produce, and you have to be active, and you have to be utilizing the license that you have. So you do have to be producing, but there's no set percentage that you need to be producing in a set amount of time.
And then, so a similar question is, what if I only want to make 20 gallons of wine at home? Do I need to be licensed? If it's for personal consumption, no. You're allowed 200 gallons per two-person house to adult person household per year. If you wanted to sell that wine to friends or family or anyone else, in that case you would need to be licensed both with Washington State and with the TTB.
So another question has come in, is this the right place to inquire for WSLCB taxes and TTB taxes? For TTB taxes, you would want to contact the TTB themselves directly. We don't have the knowledge about that. For WSLCB taxes, we can include on the what we post in the next couple of weeks contact information for the Washington State Liquor Cannabis Board tax desk for both spirits and beer and wine, and then you can contact our tax desk to find out the information.
And we have a question here. What if I want to make only 20 gallons of wine at home? Do I need to be licensed to do that? And no, you don't have to be licensed to do that if you're only going to be producing that for personal consumption only. If you intend on producing it and selling it, then that's when you would need to get federally licensed and licensed with the state.
Another question has come in, and the questions are taxes paid both to the WSLCB and TTB separately, and that is correct. Taxes, I believe, are on production for the TTB, and taxes for the WSLCB are at distribution. If there's no further questions, I believe we can conclude this webinar.
Okay, and again, this webinar is going to be posted on our website in about 2 weeks. We are going to be sending out that survey to see if you have any questions or suggestions. So please feel free to submit that. And Samantha, if you can go ahead and end our broadcast.